Hello, welcome to the Mayor Best Friends YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. To my left is a man by the name of Rendies. Would you like to say hello?
Hello everyone, I'm Randy.
And to my right is iJulian FNT. Would you like to say hello?
Hello, friends.
Hey, alright. And today we're going to take a swing at the competitive scene. Now, viewers on and off camera have asked me to cover the competitive scene, so I'm going to do my best to cover as much ground as possible. Also, we want to make this video timeless, so we may not mention some sets that are currently in the meta right now, so that way you can refer to this video a year later or 2 years later, etc, etc. Alright, so we're going to talk about the basic team building principles. Now, you need to know the role of your Pokemon. Now, there is the physical sweeper, special wall, physical wall, phaser, tank, utility, and support. And the physical sweeper is often defined by its high speed and physical attack. Special sweeper are defined by their high special attack and high speed. Special walls are Pokemon that have high HP and high special defense. Physical wall has high HP and high defense and are meant to counter physical sweepers and physical attackers. A phaser is simply a Pokemon that uses a phasing move such as Roar, Whirlwind, or Haze to counter a Pokemon that set up either by using Calm Mind, Dragon Dance, Swords Dance, etc. A tank is a Pokemon that could not take a lot of hits but can hit back or set up with a lot of damage. Utility and support. A utility and support Pokemon very simply helps support other members of the team by using moves like Light Screen, Safeguard, with Aromatherapy, and with status moves on the enemy Pokemon. Rendies, hi Julian, do you have any commentary about the definitions of the role of your Pokemon?
Yeah, I would just say that in fewer words. There are offensive Pokemon, defensive Pokemon, and Pokemon that have sort of an utility role, and you can split them into sides of the spectrum, a physical and a special one, depending if they are physically offensive, specially defensive, or physically defensive. You will want to have a combination of those in order for your team to succeed. Something like that. It's basically what covers all the different roles that a Pokemon can.
Man, Julian, you moved on to the next topic here, to team synergy. So, like Julian says, you want the Pokemon to complement each other and work together pretty well to cover its weaknesses and act as a single unit to achieve whatever type of goal your team is trying to accomplish, whether to stall, sweep, etc. Some Pokemon really work together to cover each other's weaknesses as pairs, trios, or quads and form defensive cores. Pretty much every team, unless a hyper-offensive team, needs some type of defensive core. The defensive core is probably the most important aspect of team building and one of the most important parts of battling. Recognizing your opponent's defensive core and your own defensive core and manipulating and trying to break your opponent's defensive core and then abuse whatever threat on your Pokemon that penetrates it and sweeps, and at the same time keeping your own defensive core as healthy and intact as possible to counteract aggression from your opponent. Battles are often about a push and pull, as Rendies and Julian can attest to that. Base your synergy on threats as in actual Pokemon, not types. Make a common threat list of the most common Pokemon in game, offensive and defensive. If you simply have no answer to one of them, you need to change something on your team to account for it. So for example, Dragon Fang, Dragon Meteor, Salamence may be one of the threats on the list. You may want something to answer to Salamence or some other Pokemon. The meta constantly changes, so I don't really want to talk too much about the threats right now, but make sure you construct a list of the threats so that way you can address them properly. Let's go ahead and talk about the lead synergy. Simply choosing a lead. It simply should be something that gives you the immediate advantage and does so by countering common leads. It is really just to make sure that whatever lead you choose, if it is countered, you have several easy switches to whatever may threaten it, keeping the momentum in your favor.
You gotta really take into view, and you can lead in two ways, I think. You can look for a Pokemon on your own team that is very strong against the enemy team to start getting off damage from the get-go, or setting up hazards in case you have a dedicated lead, or you can lead with something that can stop something that is very good against you that the opposing team has. You can lead basically both defensively and offensively. Like, if the opposing team has something that is very strong against you and you don't have that many good checks, not counters, which is something else that we may explain later, but the definition of a check and a counter. But in that case, you might want to lead defensively with a Pokemon that's a really big threat from the opposing team, and he might want to lead with it against you.
Yeah, so the most common and better Pokemon in the game, so you can base your team around that. Alright, so let's talk about the revenge killers, the checks, the counters, the lore, and the predicting. So we're going to talk about what a revenge killer is. Many newer players mistakenly assume that any Pokemon that beats another 1v1 Pokemon is a counter to it. For example, Starmie is a counter to Gengar because it is faster and could OHKO Gengar with Psychic. This is incorrect because although Starmie is faster and can OHKO, it cannot switch in safely and take hits from Gengar. Because of this, Starmie is actually a revenge killer to Gengar. It can come freely after a Pokemon dies, hence the name, and then either OHKOs Gengar or forces a switch. Many revenge killers are very fast and often have either some type of priority like extreme speed or escape preventing move or ability like Pursuit or Arena Trap on Dugtrio. Checks. A check is basically kind of like a less effective counter. It switches into a Pokemon with some minimal, no risk, and check what it does and maybe counters it. Since there are many different types of Pokemon and moves, many Pokemon have multiple sets or variants they can run. Counters. A counter is very simply a Pokemon that switches into another Pokemon with little to no risk, and then either OHKO it back or forces a switch. A lure basically purposely lures out a certain Pokemon, baits you, and then surprises you with an unexpected move or switch. So, for example, if there's a Pokemon that doesn't normally run a move, but it runs that move specifically to counter another Pokemon, then that is considered a lure. This is usually very risky, and most good players can easily see that you are trying to lure and predict properly. But if pulled off, then you look like a pro. And last but certainly not least, predicting. Sometimes just having a gut feeling and switching and predicting something like a lure properly can be game winning, but also game losing if you over predict your opponent. As a general battling tip, the worst thing in the world is to over predict, but really when you do predict, the important thing is to try to minimize risk and maximize reward. Obviously easier said than done.
What do I stand to gain if I predict correctly, and what do I stand to lose if I predict incorrectly? That's basically it. What do you gain if you make the play, and what do you lose potentially the game if you fail to make?
If you're a newer player, you don't want to predict almost ever. You want to predict to come a lot more naturally. The better you more you understand the game. So at the first, when you're fairly new and you're playing against people who aren't necessarily the best, you should just try to play as standard as possible and not predict. Then as you become better, you can become more accustomed to trying to predict better opponents.
I would actually agree with that advice of if you're new to the Pokemon competitive, you can basically just attack whatever is in front of you and try to avoid predictions. It'll come naturally after you get used to battling more.
Now let's go ahead and discuss the types of teams. Each team should have a single common goal, whether it is to allow for a certain Pokemon to sweep or simply stall your opponent out with status. Therefore, a few different types of teams are usually what most people go for. Now, these are of course not set in stone, but most teams should resemble something like these. Balanced teams. Balanced teams have a mix of sweepers, walls, and supports. Usually 3 walls or tanks, 2 sweepers, and 1 support or phaser. And there's the stall team, the boring but probably the most effective type of team in the current PokeMMO meta, and nearly unbeatable if played correctly. Offensive teams. Basically, a collection of 5 to 6 sweepers which can take down every single wall and sweep team, or hyper-offensive teams which consist of all physical and special sweepers.
So balanced teams in general are the most flexible, and they're probably the best ones to start playing if you want to learn the game, because you have a variety of win conditions and you effectively have experience playing every single Pokemon in the game. Whereas if you tried to play offense or stall, you only really learn like one style of how to play the game. In general, if you're a new player, it's probably best to start off by playing balance, although it probably is a harder style to play because there's a lot more things to consider. If you are to use a hyper offensive team or offensive team, most of the time your team will consist of a dedicated lead which will have rocks, and you have multiple ways of preventing the opponents from removing your rocks.
Hyper offense is the most reliable, most reliant on prediction, so it's easier to play for more experienced players, but I would say it's harder to play than balance for newer players.
Yeah.
So to start with, yeah, exactly.
I think stall is also like it's play for newer players, but I think they shouldn't start off by playing it because it won't give them it won't give them like the best like learning experience.
It also can get a little bit boring sometimes.
Yeah.
Play stall.
Yeah.
Although it's also fun seeing the other guy like just rage as he fails to kill you.
If you thought of a team idea, and if you said, you know, I feel like that this is going to work, then the best thing you can do is testing and practice. Remember, no matter how good your team looks on paper, testing is essential. So test, and then test again. Is a member not doing its job to the full extent? Would another Pokemon be a better replacement? Try not to scrap the entire team if it is not doing well, or at least try to see if 2 to 3 certain Pokemon happen to work really well together, and stick with that, and then edit the rest.
The thing I would recommend here, heavily recommend, is to join a team in PokeMMO, because replacing a team member is not as simple as just like swapping it out, because you have to go through the process of breeding the Pokemon, training it, and move setting it. So before you actually complete 6 Pokemon and go play with it, you should ask some other people, because you can definitely lose a lot of time and money in the game if you start a lot of Pokemon that may not be actually that.
I think that's good advice, because at the start you wouldn't, and so deciding your first few Pokemon which to breed is going to be very important, like coming into the future, and making sure that they're good ones that will fit on multiple teams is very important.
Right, and also try to vary up the team. If you have the same Pokemon in the same team, then there's a good likelihood that you're going to be scouted in tournaments. So make sure you can always vary the team slightly. I'm sure you all can agree with that.
Some people who can get away with using like the same kind of cores pretty often, but that's because they're reliable cores that work against most teams. So like there are some cores which will always be good against every single team, which you can get away with, but those are very neat.
Those are very niche, yeah. Now we talked about the competitive strategies and roles of Pokemon. Now we can get into a little bit more detail about the anatomy of competitive battles and the things you should know. And some items listed here may not be used that often, but it's still good to know about them. We're going to get to everything in due time. Let's go and talk a little bit about Stab. Same type attack boost. So Salamence is a dragon type, and if you do Draco Meteor, then it's going to have a Stab bonus. Rendies, would you like to talk a little bit about the importance of using a Stab type move on a Stab Pokemon?
Same type attack. Whenever you use a move which is the same type as the Pokemon that's using it, you get a 50% damage increase. 50% damage is a lot, especially when certain damage ranges against common wolves. So making sure you have a good stab move is very important, and then you need to then finish your coverage of that Pokemon like around what it lacks from the stab move. So in most cases, your Pokemon is set. It's going to be based around what its stab move is and what it does and does not hit.
Stab moves are so strong that usually any Pokemon's move will most likely have at least one stab, and then one other attack that can hit super effectively, something that resists that stab. For instance, when you were talking about Salamence Draco Meteor, still resists Dragon, of course, so that Salamence might want to run also a fire type move to hit those Pokemon that resist its stab, although the Dragon stab is still gonna be its main source of damage.
Right, so Flamethrower on Salamence as an example, that can easily thwart off steel types.
Yeah, like 90% of the Pokemon need stab. Like the few exceptions might be those that hit with stab. Yeah, exactly. They use like status and seismic toss for consistent damage, but other than super hard wall, almost every Pokemon uses and wants to use stab.
Speaking about walls, you transitioned really well. Let's talk about hazards. So there are spikes, which you can lay 3 spikes. There's also toxic spikes, and there are stealth rocks. Now, stealth rocks can only be laid once, spikes can be laid 3 times, and toxic spikes can be laid 2 times. Now, toxic spikes, if you lay just one layer of toxic spikes, then your Pokemon is going to be poisoned. However, if you lay toxic spikes twice, then your opponent is going to be badly poisoned. Any poison type can easily absorb those toxic spikes as long as that poison type doesn't have Levitate, like Weezing. Weezing has Levitate, so toxic spikes can't be absorbed by Weezing. However, a Pokemon like Nidoqueen can be able to absorb those toxic spikes pretty well. As for the spikes,
the first layer of spikes does 12.5% layer because it adds the most damage from just one single move. And then if you get a second layer, it goes up to only 16.6% damage. So that increases. It's only increasing it by about 4%. So it's a lot less important than getting the first layer. But then the third layer puts it up to 25%. So if you're playing a team which is like necessarily a stall team, which relies on damage, you want to always try and get the spikes. Like you want to get as many layers as possible. But if you're using an offensive team, a lot of the times only the first layer is important. So getting the first layer down is very important if you're using spikes, because it makes by far the biggest increase to damage.
Let's discuss about hazard removal. So you may be wondering about the spikes, and you may be wondering about stealth rocks and toxic spikes, and you're thinking, man, this match is doomed. I'm going to have to deal with being badly poisoned. I'm going to have to deal with all that. No, you don't, because there are 2 moves that actually save you. Rapid Spin and Defog. So Defog essentially made Skymory pretty good, and it also made Mandibuzz pretty good as well, and Rapid Spin is also good as well.
Always useful to have it if you have like a lot of if you have any Pokemon which take a super effective damage from rock moves, especially ones that take 4 times super effective. So think about things like Yanmega, think about things like Charizard. you always need to make sure that the enemy has no stealth rocks on the field, because if not, you'd lose half your health and very like that's a huge amount free, and
Yeah,
you
basically a
really
very
can't take.
offensive team. You want to have some sort of hazard removal because the game is gonna drag for a long time, and you want to not lose passively to spikes and.
Now let's talk a little bit about the competitive items. And these items are going to be very important to your building of the team. So there are certain items like Life Orb, Leftovers, Choice Items, Rock Helmet, Eviolite, and Damp Rock, Heat Rock, Smooth Rock, Icy Rock, Focus Sash, Toxic Orb, Flame Orb, and Expert Belt. Those choice items are Choice Band, Choice Specs, and Choice Scarf. Now, Leftovers is an item that the holder can hold, and the holder will receive a 6.25% recovery of the holder's HP at the end of each turn. Life Orb, the item will increase the power of moves by 30% while in battle, but at the cost of 10% of the user's maximum HP per turn. Rocky Helmet, if the opponent's Pokemon makes physical contact with the user, then this item will inflict 16.67% damage to the opponent's Pokemon. Eviolite, this item increases the defense and special defense of a Pokemon that can still evolve. Damp Rock, if the holder is in rain, then rain can last for 8 turns instead of 5 turns. Same for Heat Rock except for sunny weather. Same for Smooth Rock except for sandy weather. And same for Icy Rock except for hail. Focus Sash essentially lets you take one hit as long as your Pokemon's at maximum HP. If there's one massive hit like Lucario, maximum HP, and then you make the move Earthquake, and your opponent makes the move Earthquake, then you will survive that hit, because Focus Sash allows you to survive down to 1 HP. And Toxic Orb, essentially, if you hold the item, then it lets you be badly poisoned instantly. Flame Orb is an item you can hold, and it's going to instantly make you burned. And the Expert Belt, if you do a super effective move against your opponent, then that super effective move is going to be boosted at an extra 1.2%. So you're going to get that special effective boost that you would normally get, a 1.2% boost on top of that.
A 1.2 multiplier, so a 20% boost.
Yes, so a lot of people love holding Expert Belt because of that. And as for the choice items, there's a Choice Band, the Choice Specs, and the Choice Scarf. Choice Band, by the way, all these choice items boost their respective stats by 50%. So, for example, Choice Band boosts attack by 50%, Choice Specs boosts special attack by 50%, and Choice Scarf boosts speed by 50%. However, all of the choice items have one thing in common. Hence the name, you have to make one choice with a move. Once you make that move, your Pokemon is locked into that move unless you switch out. And I would recommend that you use choice items only if you are good with prediction. Rendies and iJulian can give you a little bit more detail about each of the items that I've described here. Starting off with Leftovers. So, would you like to talk about Leftovers?
So Leftovers is your most staple item. You will see it on a huge variety of Pokemon. Like most Wolves, for example, will always use Leftovers. There are a few examples where they don't. But for the most part, most Wolves use Leftovers. A very large amount of the tanks will also use Leftovers. Even there's a lot of setup Pokemon, like setup sweepers, which also use Leftovers. There's a good chance if you're making a team that you might see this item on like 4 or 5 of your Pokemon. So making sure you have a lot of Leftovers when you start playing is very important, because it's going to be a lot.
If you don't know which item to use on your Pokemon, you are good basically just putting some Leftovers.
Right. And then there's the Life Orb. So, Rendies, what sort of scenario would Life Orb? Well, what sort of scenario would Life Orb be good on a Pokemon?
I mean, Life Orb is good on mostly setup sweepers, but also some like attackers that are mixed as well. Like there's a lot of mixed attackers which use Life Orb because Life Orb boosts all moves by 30%, whereas a choice item only boosts like attack or special attack. So if you're using a mixed attacker, you want to increase both your special attack and your attack, and so Life Orb is very good on mixed attackers. But it's also good on setup sweepers because if you can't use a choice item with a setup sweeper because it will lock you into your setup move and then you can't do any damage. So Orb is very good on setup attackers as well.
And how about the Rocky Helmet? I've seen that a little bit more commonly used on Skymery to make a pseudo Ferrothorn, even though it's not really a Ferrothorn, but people try to put Rocky Helmet, or they put a Rocky Helmet on an existing Ferrothorn so they can get more damage with physical moves, right?
So the good thing about Rocky Helmet is that because whenever it takes damage from a physical move, it does 12.5% of a target's health to it. So it's very good for stopping Pokemon. Because a lot of people like to spam U-turn to try and keep priority in the battle. But if you have Rocky Helmet on something that resists U-turn, it does a lot of damage to the Pokemon using U-turn, and it punishes U-turn spam a lot. And that's like the primary function of it.
Right. And Eviolite is an item that can be held that increases the physical defense and special defense of a Pokemon that has yet to evolve. So, would you all like to talk about the benefits of using Eviolite? I noticed that Eviolite Chansey is fairly popular.
Yeah, so any Pokemon that still has to evolve gets a 50% boost to defense. So this is very good on Pokemon like Chansey, Pokemon like Porygon 2, Pokemon Dusclops. You also see it in Little Cup on a very large amount of Pokemon since it can still evolve. It's just an offensive item for most Pokemon, and it makes them in a lot of things.
Right.
It's a paradigm that you kind of break with the Violet, and it's that an unevolved Pokemon can be more powerful or more strong or more bulky than its evolution because a Violet. So for instance, Chansey might be better than Blissey in many scenarios, as well as Porygon 2 versus Porygon C. Those two are very different on their roles because one is a tank and the other one is more than an attacker. It gives viability to many Pokemon, even if they are not fully evolved.
I do have to say something here. Be prepared for knockoff. Be very prepared for that. Because if people see Chansey, then there's a strong likelihood that people are probably going to go into Tentacruel specifically to knock off your Eviolite. There's going to be a fair amount of knockoff Pokemon you see Eviolite being used. So be cautious about when to use Eviolite. And if you see a Tentacruel, run away. Because Tentacruel may have knockoff, and then he's going to essentially knock off your Eviolite. And then Chansey's no longer going to have its potency.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Also, it's the main reason why you see a lot of knockoff in Little Cup. In Little Cup, there's going to be a lot more knockoff than in other tiers, and I'm later.
I think we can use this point to talk about something else, that is scouting for a possible move that your opponent might have. Like in some situations, like for instance, Chansey is supposed to be a Tentacruel, you scout for that knockoff. That also can apply for other situations, like for instance you have a Ferrothorn who might be able to beat a Starmie, but that Starmie might be carrying Hidden Power Fire, which would hit 4 times effectively. So sometimes you want to switch out your Pokemon just to confirm if the opposing guy has something that can beat you in an unorthodox way, something that is not necessarily that common, but it might happen. So you gotta be wary of that in some situations.
Right, so basically the Starmie there in that scenario would be more like a lure, because you wouldn't expect Starmie to have Hidden Power Fire.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Going back to our item list here, we also have the Damp Rock, Heat Rock, Smooth Rock, and Icy Rock. So Damp Rock works well in rain, so Rendies, you're a doubles player. Tell me how popular the Damp Rock is, the Heat Rock, Smooth Rock, and Icy Rock.
More popular in singles than they are in doubles. I almost, honestly. Yeah, they turns that your weather lasts from 5 turns is a huge difference when you're looking for like potential. Look at if you want to like set up a sweeper in your weather, if it runs out after only 5 turns, it means that you might not be able to Pokemon as you need to, and so increasing it to 8 turns gives you a lot more power to kill a lot more things.
I would also say, or like ranking from the most common to the list, definitely the most common weather you will find is over the most common weather that uses in amplifying rock is rain, then sand, and sun and hail are seen more rarely than not, with hail not being seen almost.
As of this time of the taping, hidden abilities have not been released yet, but if hidden abilities
Yeah,
are
but
released,
hail is never going to be that useful. Like not even when with hidden abilities or anything, hail is just the inferior weather. So if you want to have a weather team, I would definitely encourage you, regardless of the time, to go for either rain or sand.
right? And then when hidden abilities come out, you can also use the Heat Rock for Drought Ninetales, and then there's the Focus Sash. Focus Sash is used a lot with defensive Pokemon like Lucario.
So Focus Sash is actually primarily used on dedicated leads. These are Pokemon that specific moves off before they die. So for example, if you use like an suicide lead in OU, for example, you want to get your rocks off before you die, and it's very important. So having Focus Sash means that you're guaranteed a specific move off, which is exceptionally good on offensive teams. It can also be used on certain sweepers that need to live things that only use or
How about Toxic Orb? Toxic Orb is pretty good for things with Poison Heal, like Breloom. Hidden abilities are not released yet as of the time of this taping, but once hidden abilities are released, Toxic Orb can be used on Gliscor. Tell me about the benefits of being badly poisoned or badly burned with courtesy of the Flame Orb.
One of the main benefits that it has is that you actually get a status absorber. Like if your Pokemon is already statused by yourself, then that Pokemon cannot be status anymore. So you can switch it into moves like Thunder Wave or Scalds more freely. Of course, you get the benefits like from Poison Heal, obviously the healing, or from Guts, you get the attack boost. So you basically get a choice band if you have a Guts user, for free, and you can switch moves, which is very useful. But I think one of the main benefits of having a user of either Toxic Orb or Flame Orb is that you have a status absorber in your team. You can switch it on sleep moves, you can switch it on paralysis moves or burning moves, and basically that relieves your team from having to deal with those kind of scenarios where you would get status.
I would agree with that. I'd also you are something as a status absorber, so you want to make sure that you can get status off before you have to. So, for example, if they have a Scold user on their team, and you know that they're going to be spamming Scold, you need to make sure that you get your status absorber in like early enough so that you get your status off before you have to switch. Because if you switch it in on a status and you don't get the status you need, it's a really bad time for you, and you really need to make sure you get one at the right time.
Right, and at the same time, there's also the Expert Belt, which, just to emphasize again, the choice items, only use those choice items when you're really good with prediction. Am I right on that, guys?
Not really, especially not with Choice Scarf. Choice Scarf can basically make any decently fast Pokemon into a revenge killer. Because, yeah, actually, they are very strong items. They're a huge part of the metagame. And yes, they require some extent of prediction, but many times you can just spam super strong moves. Like for instance, if you have a Choice Band Dragonite and they have a Ferrothorn or a, I don't know, something that can take a hit, even then you can use a 4 to go for the Bone Claw just because of how strong it is. So you can basically avoid the prediction reliance with either super strong moves or the appropriate coverage. So it's doable even if you are not that good with prediction. They are a very strong part of the.
There are also a lot of Pokemon which have which rely on choice items for late game sweeping power. It's like Typhlosion, which like to spam Eruption. You don't want to use an item like a Life Orb because every time you use Life Orb, you will lose 10% of your health, and that makes every time. So having like a choice item on a late game sweeper, especially staying as healthy as possible, do as much damage. It's very good to have a choice item on that for like to sweep late game, and that doesn't rely on prediction.
Right, just be careful not to be locked into a move, because once you're locked into a move, then your opponent can switch into another Pokemon, and then if you're the last Pokemon, if you have a choice scarf, then be very careful.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be considered. Like locking into the wrong move can very easily lose you the game. Like for instance, you lock into a Dragon move, and then you kill a Pokemon, and that's great. But then Caesar comes in and uses Sword Dance, and then you lose it because it's set up for free on your move that you cannot switch. So it's a very strong technique, but it also you have to be very careful with it.
And let's go ahead and talk about the rare items that are still used, but they're used oftentimes by people that really know about the competitive scene, but it's still good to know about these items. So let's go ahead and start off by talking about the Absorb Bulb. The Absorb Bulb is an item that the holder can hold. If it is hit by a water type move, then its special attack will increase. A cell battery, if the holder is being hit by an electric move, then its attack increases. Then we have the White Herb, which essentially restores the holder's stat decreases. So you oftentimes see this with a Shell Smash Cloyster, although nowadays people like to hold a Focus Sash so that way their Cloyster can survive a hard hit, but you still see a fair amount of White Herb Cloysters. Power Herb, it executes the holder's 2-turn move into a 1-turn move like Solar Beam, Sky Attack, etc. Throw your opponent off guard relatively easily with its Power Herb. Mental Herb cures the holder of Attraction, Encore, Torment, and Disable, and Taunt. Then the Air Balloon. Air Balloon essentially allows Pokemon to levitate off the ground so they can't be affected by ground type moves. So in order to deactivate the Air Balloon or pop the Air Balloon, you need to hit the Pokemon with another move first, and then that balloon is going to pop, and then that Pokemon can be affected by ground type moves after you pop the balloon. And then you have the Wise Glasses. The holder will have a 10% boost in special attacking moves. Scope Lenses. This item boosts the holder's critical hit ratio. Zoom Lenses. This item boosts the accuracy if the holder moves after the target. Wide Lenses. The item slightly boosts the accuracy of moves. Muscle Band boosts the user's physical attacks by 10. Razor Claw, a held item that raises the user's critical hit ratio. Iron Ball pulls down Levitate and Flying type holders to the ground, making them vulnerable to ground type moves. It also cuts down speed. So before we taped the self-help video, Reddy's and I were talking a little bit about Iron Ball and making sure that your weather is the dominant weather. Would you like to explain to the audience here about what you were telling me off camera?
So the way that weather works, if two people both like lead a weather lead, so for example, one person uses a Gigalith, the other person uses a Torkoal. The Pokemon the slower Pokemon is the one that has its weather, it cancels out because if the first person comes out, it gets its weather off, and then the second one comes out and it will cancel out the weather. So when you're both looking to lead weather leads, being slower is actually fairly important, and so a lot of slow weather leads actually benefit a lot from using Iron Ball.
Right. And also, some people even use Trick on flying type Pokemon or levitating Pokemon on purpose so that they can be hit by a ground type move. It's very gimmicky, but I've seen it work before.
As a general rule, I would recommend to stay away from all those items, at least while you're starting. Just stick to the leftovers, to the choice items, to the life orbs, and you just know that they exist and that your opponent might use them, although it is very rare actually. It's more uncommon than the other items. You just gotta keep in mind that they exist, but I would stick to the most common ones just because they are easier to use and fit on any team that you might want to build.
Right. And there's also the Black Sludge. Allows your poison type Pokemon to recover every turn. At the same time, you can punish certain Pokemon from tricking away your Black Sludge, and that Pokemon is going to be poison if it's not a poison type.
I think Black Sludge, you should always, like, it's effectively what it does is exactly the same as Leftovers, except it punishes people from using Trick. Leftovers on a poison type Pokemon, you should always use Black Sludge instead.
Something that is also important is that it's way cheaper on PokeMMO.
Yeah,
like,
it's way cheaper, yeah.
Leftovers cost like 50k and Black Sludge is like 2k. So if you're starting out and you want to use a poison type Pokemon, definitely Black Sludge is a very good item, at least in the economy side. Like if you can't afford a Life Orb on Gengar, for instance, a Black Sludge might just do the trick while you start out.
And there's the Binding Band, which essentially increases the amount of damage binding moves inflict on the opposing Pokemon. Think of Wrap, Bind, Fire Spin, etc. from 6.25% to 12.25% of the opponent's maximum HP. And then there's the Light Clay, which makes screen moves last 8 turns instead of 5. So you can keep your Flecked and your Light Screen up for 8 straight turns. That is a lot of potential.
I think it's a team archetype. Like just like there's hyper offense, there is a variation of hyper offense which centers around light screen and reflect support. So it's basically, as we said before, hyper offense teams use a dedicated lead. Most often than not, a dedicated lead wants to set up Stealth Rock, which is single-handedly the most important move in the game. But some other times you do not need the rocks, but you have a lot of setup sweepers that might appreciate taking hits better. So light screen from a Voltorb or Superior or something like that might be very useful for those kind of teams. So it's rare, but not that rare as many of the other things that we've mentioned.
It's 15k, so yeah, it's pretty cheap. It's not as cheap as something like Black Sludge, but it's still very cheap, very affordable.
We talked about all the niche items. Now, you shouldn't worry about the banned items. Let me go ahead and mention all the banned items in battle. So you cannot use a King's Rock, Razor Fang, Bright Powder, Focus Band, Quick Claw, or Lax Incense. Don't worry about those items. Those items are banned. Don't confuse Razor Fang with Razor Claw. Razor Claw is allowed to be used. Razor Claw is a held item that raises the user's critical hit ratio. The Razor Claw is allowed. Razor Fang isn't allowed. Alright, I'm glad we're all clear on that. Alright, so let's go and talk about the type boosting items, because as we mentioned earlier in our program, Dragon Fang Salamence has been used for Draco Meteor. So let's go and talk about the type boosting items. So, normal, Silk Scarf, Fire, Charcoal, Water, Mystic Water, Electric Magnet, Brass Miracle Seed, Ice Never Melt Ice, Fighting Black Belt, Poison Poison Barb, Ground Soft Sand, Flying Sharp Beak, Psychic Twisted Spoon, Bug Silver Powder, Rock Hard Stone, Ghost Bell Tag, Dragon Dragon Fang, Dark Black Glasses, and Steel Metal Coat. So we talked a lot about the items and type boosting items. Now your opponent may also carry berries as well. And let's go ahead and talk about the status curing berries. There is the Pecha berry, which recovers poison, Prism, which recovers confusion, Rost recovers burn, Chesto recovers sleep, Aspire defrosts the holder, Cherry recovers paralysis, and Lum recovers any status ailment, which is why this berry is fairly popular amongst Pokemon of many stripes, particularly sweepers, so that way they don't get poisoned, burned, etc. And then there's the recovery berries on PokeMMO. There's the orange berry that heals your Pokemon up to 10%. There's the citrus berry. When HP falls to half, the citrus berry recovers 25% of the HP. So you're going to see this a lot on Belly Drum, Aqua Jet, Azumarill, for example, and then there's the Epipaya berry.
It restores half health when you reach 1/4.
Although, if your Pokemon does not like a sour flavor, then it could cause a confusion. Oh,
Although there are some exceptions, because there are Pokemon which get Gluttony, which means that instead of healing you for when you get below 50%, it heals you when you get... So a Pokemon that has Gluttony will kind of... It drops below half. It's like Belly...
Regarding the status healing berries, you really only want to use Lum and Chesto. Like Lumberry because it's the jack of all trades. It heals you from any status basically. So you can use some setup sweepers like Dragonite or Gyarados. So you can set up on Scalds or Burns or Toxic of any type. So you can sweep after. And Chestoberry because it only heals sleep. So you use it in combination with rest to get a full HP and status health in one turn for one time. So basically all the others that heal only policies or only toxic, they are inferior to Lumberry. So that's the one you want to be.
and then there are berries that are also stat boosting. Apricot boosts special defense, Ganlon boosts defense, Lancet boosts a critical hit ratio, Lychee boosts attack, Taya boosts special attack, Salic boosts speed, and Starf is a random stat. Starfberry, you hardly ever see that, but you might see that on some gimmick guy's team, but you won't see it on a normal team. And then there's the type power reduction berries. So those berries soften the blow of certain types. So Amigma berry restores the holding Pokemon's HP when hit by a super effective move. Babera nerfs the steel type moves. Charty nerfs rock type moves. Chillian nerfs normal. Chople nerfs fighting. Koopa nerfs flying type moves. Culber nerfs dark type moves. Halbin nerfs dragon type moves. Kasab nerfs ghost type moves. Keepa nerfs poison type moves. Uka nerfs fire type moves. Paso Berry nerfs water type moves. Papaya Berry nerfs psychic type moves. Rendu Berry nerfs grass type moves. Shuka Berry nerfs down ground type moves. Tanga Berry nerfs down bug moves. Wakan Berry nerfs down electric type moves. And Yachi nerfs down ice type moves. Yachi may be a bit more common on Pokemon like Garchomp. So, Rendies, Julian, would you like to talk a little bit about the type power reduction berries?
Yeah, so in general, these things are only used on very specific Pokemon that have, which want to avoid being killed by very specific threats. So, for example, in NU, a lot of people use Cobra Berry, which is the one that reduces flying damage, on things like Gallade, so that it can't get killed as easily by Golbat. And so it's very niche and only really used on a couple of Pokemon, but the main ones you want to know about is Chople Berry for fighting type, Cobra Berry for flying type, and Yachi Berry for ice. At some point in the future, you might see more of these be used if we switch to a more offensive metagame, but for now, like, only 3 of them are really seen very often.
Yeah, something that is to be said about every single berry is that they are consumable items, which means that they are used once and then they disappear. Which means that if you want to use these items, you gotta have like many of them if you're planning on playing very many duels and just not 1 or 2 matches. And also they are only coming to play once per game. So if you use a Yachiberry to nerf an ice type move, then the next one is going to hit you for the effect. These berries are only used once per.
And also the fact that against multi-hitting moves, so something like a Icicle Spear, it only negates the damage, or only halves the damage from the first hit. And so trying to use like a Yachi Berry against the Mammospine, it won't actually help you very much because it will still die from the remaining hits from Icicle Spear.
It's a one-use type nerfing move items. Let's talk about the gems. So I would like to preface this by asking you a question. Have you ever thought to yourself, I would love to use a choice band or choice specs, but I don't like the way how I'm locked into one move. Is there a certain way that I can still get that same 50% boost for a move? The answer is yes, but that item is consumable. They are called gems. Now, there are all different types of gems, and I can give different types of examples. So, Flamethrower and Chandelure and Fire Gem, or a common, very, very common variant, Acrobatics, Gliscor, and Flying Gem, or Acrobatics, Arceratops, Flying Gem. So, Rendies, Julian, would you like to mention why Acrobatics and Flying type Gem with a Flying type Pokemon is really OP? Would you guys like to explain the reasoning behind that?
Yeah, it gives you a one-time super strong nuke, but there's a slight difference between the 50% boost that a gem gives and a choice item does, because the gems boost the attack's base power, whereas the choice items boost the Pokemon's attack stat, which is different. Usually gems are stronger, but it's just a one-time super strong nuke. Basically have no item. So you want to use them. They have a special synergy with Acrobatics, because when Acrobatics doubles its power if the holder is having no item, has no item. So when you use Acrobatics Flying Gem, it first consumes the item, boosts the power of Acrobatics, and then doubles that power because you have no item. So that's a very strong synergy. That's really only with Acrobatics, because you want to not have an item for the move's power to dot.
You may be asking, so I don't want to buy them off of the Global Trade Link. I want to get them naturally. How do I do that? Well, very simple. You get one mystery gem, one mysterious gem, and one type boost item. So the type boost items that we mentioned earlier. If you want an ice gem, and you would get one Never Melt Ice and one mystery gem, and that's going to translate to 5 ice type gems for free ice type nukes, essentially. So to use Julian's example,
Gems are mostly used in very fast meta games, because in meta games where you need to get a kill off very quickly, and getting a kill off is very important. In like singles, for example, you actually will not see very many gems, because your Pokemon will usually be out for a lot of turns and needs to power for as long as possible. So these items are not very popular in singles, but in doubles these items are very strong. But also, going into Vs and doubles is actually currently a bug with these items at the time of recording, with moves that hit multiple targets. So the way that it's supposed to work is if you use a move, let's say like Earthquake, which can hit not only the opponent's Pokemon but also your own, it will only damage the first Pokemon that it hits. It's supposed to increase the gem. Is supposed to increase the power against every single target that is hit by the move, but right now it only increases damage against the first target that it hits. So do not use these items with things like Water Spout, and do not use them with things like Earthquake in doubles.
So let's go ahead and talk about priority moves. So things like Bullet Punch, Quick Attack, Fake Out, etc. Fake Out only works once, and that's an instant 100% flinch. Fake Out does not work on ghost types. Kangaskhan is a scrappy Kangaskhan, which means it can hit ghost type Pokemon. Rendies, would you like to explain a little bit about how priority moves work?
Okay, so when the game is calculating which Pokemon moves first, it accounts for speed, but before it accounts for speed, it accounts for the priority of the move. So if you're using a move which is a higher priority than the opponent is using, you will move before them.
They are usually low base power, they are not that strong, but they are very common because they allow you to bypass the opposing Pokemon's speed and revenge kill. That's another tool of revenge killing that exists. You can have either a Choice Scarfer, a very naturally fast Pokemon, or a Pokemon with priority to pick up weakened Pokemon.
Yeah, so as Randy was mentioning earlier, if you have your Pokemon using Helping Hand, and then another Pokemon wants to use Quick Attack, then your Helping Hand will go first since it's priority +5.
Also, it's useful to know, even though our game is currently, like at the time of recording, is mostly using, so we're using Gen 5 Pokemon, Gen 5 map, we are actually using Gen 7 for most of them, which is why, if you compare the list to the newer Gen character list, there are a few differences, such as Follow Me is now, it used to be +3. You should know and Gen 7 and PokeMMO, so do not expect everything to be the same as it would.
Take a look at this list, and if there's a move that may fit your match, then you may want to analyze that a little bit.
It's almost a good advice to have at least one priority move on every team, just because it can get you out of some rough situations. When the Pokemon is about to win the game for itself, you can kill it before it can move.
Priority is very important to know about, but it's also important to know about stat boosting moves. Moves like Swords Dance, Dragon Dance, Nasty Plot, Calm Mind. These moves are also important because these moves can help you win in matches. Although, be very careful to not set up while there's a Pokemon using Haze on you. Haze basically refreshes all the stat boosts that you have done.
Yes, and it will also refresh any negative stat changes on yourself. So if they use a Shadow Ball against your Pokemon with Haze, and it lowers your defense, if you Haze, it will then put your defense, or sorry, special defense back up to what it originally was. Not only useful for just removing your opponent's self boost, but it also removes any like negative stat changes on yourself.
And now let's talk a little bit about the status moves. So now we're going to talk a little bit about moves that actually cut down on stats. So Thunder Wave, your opponent is paralyzed, cuts down on your speed stat. Will-O-Wisp burns your opponent, but it cuts down on your attack stat. Spore basically puts your Pokemon to sleep, so your Pokemon is immobilized until it wakes up. And Toxic essentially whittles down your HP because Toxic badly poisons your Pokemon. So there are certain cases where status moves could determine the difference between a winner and a loser.
So status moves are very commonly found mostly on wolves. They're used on some of Pokemon as well, but for the most part, most of the things that are using status moves are on wolves because wolves don't have very much offensive pressure by themselves, and so instead of doing damage through their attacks, they often do damage through status moves instead.
Also, there are clerics as well, which also recover your poison, your paralysis, your sleep. There's Pokemon with Heal Bell, there's Pokemon with Aromatherapy, and Brendies, Julian, would you like to talk a little bit about the wonders of having a cleric in your team?
There are a lot of Pokemon which really you don't want them to get status. So there's a lot of times where you, against like a water type, you have to switch in something that might get scalded, depending on your team build, and like that sucks. But thankfully, if you have something like Heal Bell, you can mitigate that to an extent, and it means that you can have another go at switching in. So if you don't necessarily have the best switch in against a water type, let's say you want to switch in Gyarados and try and set up, but there's a 30% chance every time you switch in that you might get burned, then you can't switch it in very freely if you don't have something like a Heal Bell. But having something like a Heal Bell means that you can switch in Gyarados into you can set up a sub on the next turn, and then you can set up for free. And it just means that there's a lot less risk in certain setup sweepers of getting status. And also, it's just very good
very common in stall.
Yeah, on stall teams it's very important. Also on Togekiss teams it's very important. On some setup sweepers like Togekiss.
Certainly. Now, if you want to be nefarious, and if you want to say, you know what, no, you are not going to, you're not going to heal yourself up. You're not, nope, Well, there's actually, you can do Heal Block, which blocks your opponent from doing any heal moves, or you can be even more nefarious and you can do Taunt, which means that any move that's not a physical or special attacking move you cannot do. So no Sword Stance, no recovery move, no spikes.
Yeah, Taunt is just a very good universal move. It prevents so many things against pretty much every team archetype. Against defensive teams, it stops them, which allows you to set up. It stops them from healing, which allows you to get the kill. It stops them from putting up stealth rocks or spikes. It prevents a lot of things against like defensive teams, but even against offensive teams, sometimes if you have a Gengar, and that will often give a free switch into a Scizor, which can very easily set up Sword Dance against you. And sometimes what you can do against like certain setup Pokemon is you can taunt against that setup, even if they might kill you, just to prevent them from getting the sweep. So even against like offensive teams, and even like on offensive Pokemon, you can just use taunt just to stop them from setting up their sweeper, which can win you the game very often.
Right. And there's also Torment as well, which blocks you from using the save move twice in a row, but once per turn. So, yeah. All right.
It forces you to, it forces, if you use it against the opponent, it means that they have to, use a different move every single turn. They can never use the same move twice in a row. Honestly, Torment doesn't really have like almost any practical uses, and it is good to know it exists.
And then there's Encore, which essentially, it cheers your Pokemon, and your Pokemon is locked into a move, and it has a choice band effect, except no plus 50% boost. It's just being locked into one move.
Of using Encore is with Wobbuffet. So the good thing about Wobbuffet is that its ability allows it to trap opposing Pokemon. So what you do is you switch it in against preferably like necessarily a wall. Like you switch it in on a wall when you predict they're going to use an attacking move, and then because what you do is you invest all your speed into Wobbuffet, into its EVs, so therefore it should outspeed most walls in theory. And so what you do is you encore them into the attacking move, and then because every single turn you can then kill them with either using a counter. And that's probably the best use of Encore.
Right.
But it can be used also against certain Pokemon. Like, so if you Encore someone into using a recovery move, or something that doesn't have any pressure on yourself, you're then able to use that to set up a sweeper, because they have no pressure on you.
Or prevent their own setup with something like Whimsicott. That's also a good example.
Yeah, that's a good example as well.
3 turns, that's to keep in mind, so you don't like log into that move forever. You only last 3 turns, so you gotta take advantage of that time you got for.
Right. There's the damage calculator. Brendies, would you like to talk about the damage calculator? Which, by the way, I'm going to be linking down in the description below. It's important to know how to use this.
Yeah, so basically the damage calculator allows you to input different, like, change the IVs, the EVs, the damage, the move, how much you do Pokemon does against another one in a specific scenario. And so it's very useful when you're starting off to especially learn how much damage. So you need to know, I against this other one, can I stay in? Will it kill me? And so you're able to put in what you think your opponent's going to have and what your Pokemon is, and you can see if you can kill it and if it can kill you. Very useful when you're starting out, as I said before, because it just allows you to like learn so many more things and allows you to be a lot more adaptable. In battle as well, you can use it in so many different situations just to if you're not sure if you can get a kill or not, you can just quickly put up with damage calculation. You can throw in your Pokemon stats and you can find out if you can grab kills. It's also very useful when you're looking to EV your Pokemon. If you don't know, if you want to like hit it as a specific damage range, so either if you want to live something, you want to kill something very specific, it allows you to know how many EVs you need to invest into defense or into attack or into health.
So for example, I put up Hydreigon and Scizor as a damage calculator. Turns out that one Fire Blast is going to knock out a Scizor. It's important to know about this, and oftentimes people are going to advise you to change the level to 50 on each Pokemon, and even then, Hydreigon's Fire Blast is still going to knock out the Scizor. So
usually when changing the damage to 50, it means that you're going to be seeing a higher damage number than you were seeing before, which is more important because that's what we are using in PokeMMO, so you want to have the most accurate ranges possible.
Right, and you can also set the amount of hazards, so you can set up Stealth Rock, Protect, Leech Seed, and this is important to know for your calculations. If you don't know this, if you don't know how to punch in calculations, then there's a good likelihood that people are going to run over you in tournaments. So it's important to know about certain things on the field, it's important to punch this in. This Pokemon damage calculator is essentially your best friend. Now I know what some of you are asking, but Mara best friends, in the tournaments, my matches are timed. How am I supposed to punch in all the calculations? Well, I don't really want to answer that question. I'm going to let Rendies answer that question because he won several tournaments before. So, Rendies, how are you able to punch in calculations?
If you really are worried about calculating like every single Pokemon, before the tournament what you should do is you should open up 6 different tabs of the damage calculator and have every single one of your Pokemon like set up with your EVs, your IVs, your moves. And it means that no matter what you're against, you're able to very quickly switch to that tab, and you're able to like input what your opponent has and what you have, and you don't have to worry about inputting your Pokemon every single time because it's already up there. But as you become less and less reliant on damage calculating, I almost never calculate anymore because I usually use like Pokemon that I've seen before and a matchup that I haven't seen before, so I'm often very easily able to guess the range without needing to calculate. But when you are newer, you will need to calculate a lot.
Another thing I would like to link to you is actually the competitive assistance. So just in case on the PokeMMO forums, if you want to ask a question to see, I wonder if I can do this on my Pokemon, then you can do that. Honorable mention to Memento. I don't really recommend Memento because your opponent can just switch out of that move.
So the times you want to use Memento is with Pokemon that have one-turn setups, because most of the time when you immediately switch out, and so Memento you need to have a Pokemon that can set up in one turn. So a good example of that is something with Shell Smash, because it gives you the attacks, special attack and speed all in one turn, and because with Shell Smash you lose defense and special defense, it makes your Pokemon a lot more vulnerable than it would otherwise be. And so with Memento, it means that they are doing a lot less damage, and so you are a lot less likely to be killed when setting up your Shell Smash. Another good example is Belly Drum, because it's a one-turn setup, you lose half your health, again you become very vulnerable. And so them having reduced attack and special attack is exceptionally useful when setting up with Belly Drum and Shell Smash especially.
Right, but they can always switch in and out to refresh that, right?
I mean, yeah, they can always switch in and out, but the point is that it's a one-turn setup move, so on the turn they switch out, you're already set.
And these are the sorts of questions you can ask on the PokeMMO forums. As you may know, that this video is not going to cover everything, but we're going to cover as much as we can in the self-help video. That way you can have a basic understanding of how the competitive scene works, and so that way you're set after you're done with this video. So you can go to the PokeMMO forums. You can also go on the PokeMMO Discord.
Always the best, and it's not just for advice. It's also got like more general talking in it. But if you do ask for advice there, often than not, you'll probably get a response.
You might want to keep an eye on what the tier list council says. And how do you know that someone's a tier list council member? Well, their color is slightly different. So tier list council members are a dark orange. But I would say that the forums is a little easier for people to reach you. On forums, your whole topic is literally that one question, and the PokeMMO Discord is just one room with a ton of questions. So if you want to have a more individualized answer, then I would say the forums is a better place to go to for competitive questions. I know that some people may be wondering, so what tier do I specialize in? And how do I know what Pokemon are being used? Well, in your Pokedex, actually, you can separate Pokemon by their tier. So OU, UU, NU, and Little Cup. And try to seek out people who are good in the tier that you want to specialize in. So Rendies, for example, specializes in the doubles tier. Julian, I assume that you specialize in OU, right?
OU and doubles, yeah, I play both.
This is very important advice. On top of the damage calculators, if you want to win a tournament, then you have to be unique in your playstyle. Differentiate yourself from the crowd. If everybody's battling the same way, then there's a good likelihood that people already know the set and they can easily dismantle it. However, if you have a set that's a little bit different, have a brand new variant of a certain Pokemon, then you may want to bring it to tournaments. You may want to test it out beforehand to make sure it works on your close friends. And then once you go to the tournament, upon the final match, then you might want to bring a Pokemon that may differentiate yourself from the crowd, differentiate your opponent. Your opponent has no clue how to handle it because it's a brand new threat that you found. You kept quiet all the way throughout the final match, and you could win because you throw your opponent off guard. So, Rendies, have you ever come up with innovative sets that change the whole meta? I know you've been here for years, so I figured I'd ask that question.
I would definitely like to think so. I think back in the day, I either came up with like a lot of different sets, or even though I didn't come up with them, I think I popularized like a lot of different sets and doubles, especially back in the day. I would say that I single-handedly popularized like the move Icy Wind. I was the one who introduced Blaziken to doubles. I think I probably like was the first person to use almost every single Gyarados set there is in doubles at this point. I don't know. I've come up with a lot of sets over the time, but not as much recently.
Man, I'm glad to have you as a co-host then. So, Julian, have you ever revolutionized the meta?
Have I, Randy?
Every single team he uses is so crazy that like his teams make no sense, but like they work, and so like nobody's copying them because they're that crazy. But he is very innovative and plays very different.
Yeah, I've seen actually a couple people running the same shit. Sometimes they fail.
Right. So if you want to win, be innovative. Don't copy, innovate. Innovate. You can copy some, but generally innovate. Innovation, pretty much like you get a 70 to 80% chance to win a tournament. I mean, it's really, I am 70 to 80% confident that you would win tournaments the more innovative you are, and as long as you keep testing out the set to make sure it works, because it is a new set, you're good. Rendies popularized several sets, and he won a lot of doubles matches because he was so innovative in the tier.
Definitely. If you craft your own teams, then you have like adjusted to your own playstyles, then you have a way better chance of feeling comfortable with it and just doing better.
If you're a new player, you should probably not try and be innovative, because being like a good, which is bad, the understanding of a tier and like being able to counter what you think your opponent's going to use. And so there's no reason to be innovative if you don't have a good understanding of what you think is going to be used and you don't know what you should try and play against.
Yeah, definitely first get comfortable with the meta and then try to break it.
Would you recommend that people should play PvP a little bit?
I mean, yeah,
Totally.
experience is always
That
going
is
to be
the
helpful.
the single reason why everyone should start with OU. Because the matchmaking is just more populated, there's more people who play it, and you just get more experience.
So in fact, I would even argue that joining competitive is actually a lot easier now than it was back then. Because back then, there used to be less items.
There wasn't matchmaking, so you couldn't find battles very easily.
Yes.
Yeah, there are more resources available right now.
Certainly, yes. And there's also a lot of guides as well on the forums. And there's this video as well, so...
One thing I do want to mention, because I know we are coming towards the end of the video, there is the most important thing to competitive battling and the most important thing to like being a good competitive battler that we have not yet mentioned, which is win conditions. And I think it's the area in which I see the most like people fail. Even there's still very experienced players who sometimes like don't establish their win condition correctly and end up losing battles because of it. And I think it's so incredibly important, and it's just not really understood enough by newer players. In every single battle, for the most part, each team has like specific on what you are bringing and what your opponent is bringing. So if your opponent's bringing something which is necessarily, like let's say you're bringing a team which is weak to Sword Dance Scizor, and you have a Sword Dance Scizor, then you know that is your win condition, and that is the thing that you want to play around. So anything on their team which might be able to take it, you want to make sure you chip them, and you want to get them low enough into a range in which Scizor can kill them. Your opponent's like win condition is probably going to be to avoid that from happening. And so sometimes you have to take a play which looks bad on paper. So sometimes you have to let a Pokemon die which you don't want to die, just so you can avoid taking the chip damage on your other Pokemon. And so
Yeah,
knowing
sometimes letting a Pokemon die used to get like 60% off on opposing Pokemon doesn't look like a good trade on paper, but it's actually very good because the health that Pokemon is more important than the health on yours because his Pokemon is more important to his team than your Pokemon was to your own team. Something like that.
And also another important thing, when you lose, don't be cursing out your opponent. Don't be. I've seen this several times over the years. Don't curse out your opponent. Just tell him GG. Good game. GG. Just whisper him GG. Then if I lose, I just whisper GG, right? You guys don't get angry and just log off. You're like, I just want to log right off right now, right?
I mean, I think I have, but I think more importantly, I think even if you do feel like the battle was like necessarily particularly bad, you feel like they had really good RNG and they didn't deserve to win it or whatever. Like even like I think at that point you should still probably say GG. But even if you really don't want to say it, it's better just to not say anything at all than to like say anything bad towards the person, because that would just look bad on yourself. If you really can't contain yourself and just log off, it's a lot better than saying anything negative.
I mean, also try to learn from your mistakes. You're gonna make a lot of them, especially if you're just beginning. So see what you could have done better that maybe influence the match in your favor, and try to fix it.
All right.
Yeah. If anyone ever claims that they don't make mistakes, then they're probably not a very good player.
Yeah, but everybody makes mistakes. Randy's makes mistakes, Julian makes mistakes, and I make mistakes. I mean,
Don't worry about it.
mistakes are a part of learning. If you're not making any mistakes, then you're not learning anything, right?
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, so
It's better to try and make those mistakes against like friends or in matchmaking than in a tournament.
anyways, this is the Mara Best Friends YouTube channel. There's no longer a Rapidash here. It's because recently I had a mascot change. Shout out to Professor Einstein for buying Shiny Aeron for me. So thank you so much, Professor Einstein, for changing my mascot. Anyways, this is the Mara Best Friends YouTube channel. Thank you so much, Randy's, for helping me out with the competitive self-help video.
No problem.
And thank you so much, Julian, for helping out as well.
It was a pleasure.
Alright, and this is the Mara Best Friends YouTube channel. Don't forget to comment or subscribe to my channel, like or dislike the content that you see here. And this is the Mara Best Friends YouTube channel signing off. PokeMMO at your service.